From the Bronx to San Diego, intentional perseverance and real-world gut checks. All this and more right now.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life. The Remarkable People Podcast.
Hello, my remarkable friend. Welcome to this week's episode of the Remarkable People Podcast. This week, you're going to hear from a professional sales and product pricer, entrepreneur, leader, and author, Marcos Rivera, author of Street Pricing. He's going to share with us today his journey through life. We're going to go brief, concise, and to the point. He's going to talk about how important time is and how, like we always say in the podcast, it's the most valuable asset God gives us, right? He's going to talk about perseverance, staying focused on a vision, finding the vision, and then making sure that you're living on purpose in your decision making. He's going to break down how he had his success so you can too. So please get your note paper and pen ready. Make sure you share this episode with your friends and family. Reach out to Marcos and myself if it's helped you. If you have any questions, and if you're like, Dave, you're ugly, the podcast stinks, why don't you do this differently? Write me at my website, davidpasqualone.com. Reach out through the contact us page and let me know how I can be better for you. Our whole purpose with the Remarkable People Podcast is to glorify God and help you grow. We love to hear the positive comments, but negative comments are just as important because it's just going to make us better. As iron sharpeneth iron, so the man the countenance of his friend. So again, please like the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, join our mailing list on the website, tell your friends about it. You know what to do. But right now, I want you to focus on God, you, and Marcos, and enjoy this episode on purpose, on time, right now. Hey, Marcos, how are you today, brother?
Dude, I'm terrific. Loving life.
Man, that's great. You and I spoke literally months ago, and I've been pumped for this episode. I got your copy of Street Pricing in the mail, and I know we're going to talk about that in the show. But for listeners who are serial part of our community, they listen to every episode, or to the person who's new. This is their first episode of the Remarkable People Podcast. If they commit to sitting down and listening to this episode or running at the gym while they listen to this episode, what is one thing you guarantee they're going to take away to benefit their life?
I think the one thing I'll guarantee they'll take away is how to persevere. They always tell you that. They don't tell you actually how to do it. So we're going to cover a little bit of that today.
Beautiful. And, you know, the saying, the best ability is dependability, right? Perseverance, sticking to it. So this is something I need. This is something most people need. And I'm excited to share your story. So at this time, Marcos, you know, who you are today was made up of your life, the good, the bad, the pretty, the ugly, the pretty ugly, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to have you start from your birth, just work chronologically through your life, and we'll dialogue along the way to see where and how you became the man you are. Sound good?
Yeah, that sounds terrific. Let's get into it.
Awesome, brother. So where were you born? I can tell from your complexion, Ireland, right?
I get that a lot. Very common. No, man.
If you're listening to the podcast, that is total sarcasm. If you're watching, you know exactly what we just did.
If they're not looking, exactly, man. No, listen, I'm a skinny kid from the Bronx. Like, I grew up in New York City, Puerto Rican family, and single parent household. My mom raised us all. And one of the key things in growing up there is a couple of very common paths you can take, right? You can go down and join a gang, or you can get into a bunch of trouble. Good thing my mom kept really close eye on me and kept me out of all that stuff. But one of the other things is that I'm the oldest of three. And so I felt this natural responsibility to watch over my younger brother, younger sister. And so that also kept my head on straight, kept me out of trouble, avoided a few close calls with, going down the wrong path in my early days. and kept it straight overall because I felt like so many people were depending on me. My mom, who was all by herself, and my two younger siblings. So that was the beginning of my personality, how that started to develop, right? So fast forward out of the Bronx and moving all the way to San Diego. Think about this, right? Think about going from, hard living on the streets, surviving there. I was on, public welfare. We didn't have much money, barely make ends meet. Moving out to San Diego, pretty expensive city in its own right, but very different vibe, right? I came out here, people were making fun of my accent. They said, hey, say coffee again, say coffee again. They make fun of me. It was hard to fit in as a kid. And that also made things really difficult for me, expanding socially and trying to get a new group of friends out in a whole unfamiliar place, right? So what did I do is I slowly began to adapt as I started making my way through high school, learning, how people tick, what ways I could fit into different groups. I also made a couple of really close, good friends. And what that did for me was made me realize that you are in complete control of how people perceive you. Okay. And that was a big lesson for me growing up as a kid, as a teenager. I didn't realize I went from being, some outcast to being, somewhat in the middle, fairly popular, not the most popular, but a lot of people knew who I was. And I realized like, man, I just changed the way I spoke or I didn't speak and changed the way I acted around people. It started making me realize there's something really worthwhile learning more about, and that's psychology and how people work. And that's going to come into my life a little bit later. So blasted through that, I got to high school, graduated pretty well and moved into UCSD. Now I'm moving into a college campus where there's a lot of affluent people, and I'm just trying to get my groove on, trying to figure out, all right, how do I navigate this whole environment? Okay. There's so many people from different backgrounds, cultures, people driving, Mercedes and nice cars. And here I come with my clunker, beat up Toyota Corolla that I had my pull-out stereo, not to date myself a little bit, right? And I was really proud of that.
Yeah, so nobody could steal it, right? The pull-out stereos?
No, I pulled that sucker out every time in closed up shop. So that was to me like the beauty of where technology was going, right? It went from, your 8 tracks and cassettes into these pullouts. I had my beeper. I thought I was really cool, right? Yep. And that keeps on moving forward. I love tech since the very beginning. Like my parents were like, hey, that blinking 12 on the VCR, for those of you who know what a VCR is, can you reset that? Can you fix that? And I was always game for that stuff. So now you're seeing the underpinnings of my background, right? Loving technology, figuring out how people tick and all that, and sort of working through some tough scenarios, right? All that comes into play as I moved out of college, and I was actually now working for like banks and financial institutions. I thought I was going to be a finance guy, right? And that's where I jumped into my career. I'm like, great, I love numbers. Numbers make the world go around. There's always a right answer to a numbers problem. I hated writing papers. I love math problems, giving me all day long. So that drove me. That's a third ingredient I'm also dropping in here as well. So as I went through that, finished up, got some jobs at financial institutions, worked my way up, and then found myself at an interesting crossroads. I got introduced to this thing called product management. And I'm like, okay, so I can get out of numbers and that damn monthly close that always just drove me crazy for like 2 weeks, and moved into something called product management. It was fairly newer at the time, right? This is in the mid 90s. And I thought, okay, well, great. What do I do? How do I figure this out? And I fortunately had really great mentors at that stage to teach me about responsibility, about driving a profitable product, figuring out what customers want, tying all these things together. Right. And I thought, okay, this is actually really cool. And it's starting to pull in all of the things I love. I love technology. I love figuring out how people tick, and I love numbers. And it just really started coming together for me at that stage. So everything I had ever built from a software integration product perspective, I kept working up the ranks. Soon, fast forward, I was a leader, a product executive. I had teams and products and portfolios underneath me. And guess what? Everything I ever had to build, I had to put a price tag on it. And I always found that to be actually harder than building the product, but I also found it more rewarding. Like, what are people going to pay for this thing that I just spent months and months with a whole team trying to build? And that took me down a whole nother path that made me figure out, okay, how do you understand and articulate value to someone? How do you make someone understand why is this is worth paying for than some other alternative? How do you frame it? How do you position it, right? It pulls into all those things I talked about into what we call pricing and monetization today. And that's how the muscle started getting built. And man, oh man, I did that product after product, year after year. And next thing you know, I started developing more pattern recognition. I could look at a problem and start breaking down where the pricing starts to be ineffective and figure out, okay, here's how you make it more effective, because this is how people work, or this is how the value is framed, or this is how you can become more profitable. And as I kept doing that, just kept getting better and better, like anything else. Fast forward, I went into a private equity firm as their head of pricing and packaging. And then from there, I'm doing this across all sorts of companies and products all over the world. Now the engine is on overdrive. Like it's really, for me, getting easier and easier to see where the opportunities are and where they're not. Did that over 62 companies of tech companies that we owned. And then after that, started on my own, said, you know what? It's time for me to take control of my time. I can't be on a plane 24/7, especially with me being a new dad, expanding my family. And frankly, I love San Diego so much, I don't want to live anywhere else. So started on my own, all by myself. Now we're about 15 people and growing as a boutique firm. And I love what I do. I look forward to it every single day.
Yeah. And like you said, 62 companies and growing. What do you think you had a position, you took the opportunity, you had the growth and the success, and then you moved to the next opportunity, and you did that 62 times. That's not by coincidence. What is it, how you're wired, or whether it was natural or learned? What did you learn that was a common thread of success that wove through those opportunities that our listeners can apply?
I would say the number one thing is having a ladder mindset. I always build on the previous thing I learned, always. And so the idea here is if you go back to the background at the bank, the background as an early product manager, the background at the private equity firm, I'm always taking steps up to what I learned previously. And so it's not about making a complete divergence and pivot away from what I knew. I was like, how can I build on what I knew? And that made every next step very intentional for me. Every other company that I looked at, I just learned about a concept in packaging. How can I build on that with the next company? I just learned another concept about, how do you discount the right way? How do I build on that for the next company? So for me, it was always additive. And if you have that mindset, then I think it helps clarify some of the paths you can take and why you make decisions and how you plow forward and what drives you to succeed and persevere, like I mentioned in the beginning.
And for those who are starting out or maybe been stuck in their position for years, do you recommend taking any opportunity you're given to just prove your worth, or were you selective in your opportunities?
I was selective. And the reason why is somebody like me, my personality type, I'll tell you right now, I am a big fat introvert. All right. I don't have anything wrong. Like there's nothing wrong with people. I don't have anything against them, but man, I am exhausted after talking to people in a group, which is funny for someone like me who talks to tons of people every day. But that also means I'm very introspective and I'm always thinking about why I'm doing something and the next step. So I always recommend, just like you said, right? If you're looking at different opportunities to take, I would do it on purpose. Okay. If I had to leave with one liner, do it on purpose. Right. And so if you have those opportunities, 3 or 4, and you look across them and say, okay, what can help me build on what I already know or what I've learned or take me forward to where I want to go? Choose those opportunities on purpose. It's going to help you have a lot more drive and wherewithal and persevere through. Sometimes a decision is going to feel kind of crappy. You're going to be like, man, I really want to go down this way. But if you're really clear on why you did it, that often helps push you through the other end, which is the key.
Yeah. And so that brings up a great point. The perseverance is great and the seizing opportunity is great, but you needed that vision, that direction. When did you get the vision and direction for your life?
That's a really great question. For the vision and direction for my life, I think it really boils down to knowing what I want and don't want. And that happened early on when you don't have a lot. So if I go back to my upbringing, right, in, single, like 450 square foot apartment in the Bronx, right? Not having a lot to go on and moving forward, and being a good role model for my younger siblings, being a dependable, lieutenant and right hand for my mom. Like, what do I really want? And a lot of people tend to let others answer that question for them. And as I moved into my teens and started again learning more about how people tick, by the time I graduated high school, I realized what I really want is control of my time, because I think time is more valuable than money. And I learned that when I lost my mom as a kid, and I wished I would have spent more time with her, right? Just flat out being real with you. Okay.
Yeah.
When I lost my mom, it's like, you can't get that back. And so early on, when you have, things that happen to you, and everybody's had their story of loss and of losing someone or something or someone very close to them, I use that as fuel to be very deliberate in what I do, because I don't want to be in that position again of wishing I had more time. So that was my guiding light throughout high school. And then moving into college, I sat down and I said, you know what? I'm not going to be, very, let's just say, exploratory in my college studies. I know that I want to be in business and I want to be in economics, because those are the kind of things that fuel me. Those are the classes I excelled at. Again, people, technology, numbers. I love that stuff. So with all that in my head and what I know, that's where I was very clear on my major, never changed my major, never changed my minor, went right through as I planned, because of all those things. I was clear about what I wanted right at the end of high school.
Beautiful. And then once you got through and you're evaluating these opportunities, you're taking them, you're seizing them, you're moving closer to the vision, what you have intentionally in mind, where does that bring you in your life, Marcos?
There's another part of it that makes me wonder, like, what if I would have done this, or what if I would have done that, right? And there's people out there who probably wonder, like, man, I can go so many different directions, but where do I go? What do I pick? I always look at decisions as two-way doors in many cases, right? I always feel like if I make a decision one way, I can adapt and modify and go another path if I really wanted to. And I think that allows me the freedom to make these choices with such conviction, right? I think that's where the perseverance falls down, is because you don't have conviction. And conviction comes from having the confidence that you're going the right way, but also that safety net to know, look, if this isn't working out for me because I'm learning about it as I go through it, I can change course. And I think what that leads me today is someone who is not afraid to commit and not afraid to push hard and push through in anything that I do. And it's, again, accumulated over, again, learning, passions, pain, everything that's come together, and what makes me me. And so that's how kind of I see it right now.
So for the people, everybody has challenges in their life, and some are more intense, some are more lengthy. Some people have a bad month, some people have a bad decade, right? It's just how life plays out. And sometimes our mindset gets us in a rhythm and a rut, good or bad, right? We started off this conversation talking about the importance of perseverance and the importance of, moving towards that vision and sticking to it. What advice do you have to the listeners to keep themselves motivated, even in the most difficult of circumstances and times?
Man, I'm going to use a term that I don't like, and then I'm going to break it down, okay? Because what I really lean on is that mental dexterity, right? The ability for your mind to see what's happening in the future, but know that you're not there yet, and it's going to take some work to get there. To keep the vision in focus, but also be able to see the reality of what's going on right now and change that reality or address it head on. So what I worry about is very broad strokes when it comes to you and your future and how you act and how you get it. And what I mean by that is, it's okay to be in step 1 of 1,000, right? It's okay to keep one foot in front of the other and plowing towards that end goal. But sometimes it's easy to mix up in your mind, like what's not working now could mean that that goal that you're striving for in the next couple of years is also not going to work. Like, no, I try to separate those things out. Like the way I look at it is you have a goal and you have steps to get there. And what's happening now may not be ideal. It may be crappy. You might be, in a scenario that is less than ideal, but that doesn't mean the goal is invalid or the thing you're trying to go for is any less worth it. And so for me, I always try to separate those two things out, and I can focus in on the detail of what's happening now and be brutally honest with myself, saying, crap, you know what, this is not going to work the way I'm doing it, while still maintaining that long-term vision of this is where I'm going, this is where I'm going to get to. It's that differentiation of the two, keeping both of them in mind is key. I think that's where separates people who can long-term get to their goal and people who can't.
Yeah, I'd agree completely. I think that's excellent advice. And you've proved it with your life. You're your human guinea pig. It's working, right? So where are you today, Marcos? You talked about how you started your organization from scratch. You have 15 employees now. You're growing. What's your life look like today? Where are you heading in the future?
Man, right now it's great to have options. Let's put it that way, right? So when I first started this business, it was right before COVID hit. It's about 6 months before COVID. Everybody thought it was crazy. On paper, you're working for a really big private equity firm. You're getting FaceTime with the billionaire founder. You're popular in the firm because of your skill set. You're lots of room to move up and grow and so on. You're about to have a second kid. Why in the hell would you leave that to start your own business? And then come later, a big fat pandemic smack you upside the head, like as you're building it up, right? But again, those were the short-term things that, while less than ideal, frankly, made me nervous. Like I ain't gonna lie here and saying I'm, smiling all the way. Like there's some times where I had to really sit down and gut check, like, is this something I really want to do? But the point of the matter is I saw, okay, look, I do want to keep going here because ultimately controlling my time is most important. And this pandemic is going to reveal other opportunities. Even though it was locked down, there were folks that a lot of companies stopped spending because they weren't sure if they were going to, be in business. It also opened up new business models. It also drove a lot more towards remote work, remote engagements, things like that. So I decided to change my model that was a lot more remote, which today gives me a lot of freedom on serving a lot of different customers. So right now, the business is 15 strong. We're growing. We're very profitable. And I'm going to continue to go deeper in my space. So this is not serving a bunch of other spaces that I don't know very well. It's just going deeper in the space that I know, which tends to be technology services, marketplaces, things like that. And so my biggest vision today is let's get deeper and let's scale out. So that way the business it's easier to expand and do other things when you have that scale. So that's where I am from a business perspective. Personally, I am very happy to be that dad that is home, seeing my kids go to school, having dinner with my wife. There's all the things that you take for granted, a lot of cases, that are just put a smile on my face all the time. So I'm doing it my way and it feels good.
Amen. Amen. So let's talk about street pricing. It's the book you wrote. I have actually a pre-screen copy. So the cover may be different if you're watching, ladies and gentlemen, but it's still Marcos's book. Talk about the expertise that you share in this book and with your company. We have listeners from all around the world. We have business owners, we have employees, we have middle class, we have upper class, we have every kind of demographic you can imagine, Marcos. But for the listeners who are hearing your story and they want to learn more about you, what do you and your team specialize in, and what can they expect in street pricing?
So what we specialize in is really helping founders and entrepreneurs build a confidence to price those products on purpose. I go back to what I said earlier, right? Doing it on purpose. And we do advisory, research, coaching, consulting for some of the biggest tech companies in the world. And we help them figure out their whole monetization strategy. They build something new. Here's how you should price it. They buy another company. Here's how you need to bundle it. Like all the key things that are going to unlock their growth, we focus on with those firms, and we're very hands-on in what we do. Now, if you look at my firm and you look at even the book, you notice that yes, I do focus in on the technology sector. Why? Because I love it so damn much. The value changes so fast, and I just think it's so fascinating. But a lot of the principles that we apply, figuring out what your customers want, tying that to the offer, and pricing in a way that frames the value appropriately, like all these things, they can apply to anything or anyone. And so I really wanted to broaden the audience a bit with the book. And the book was really my effort to attack my biggest enemy, which is guesswork. Guesswork is my biggest enemy. People out there, smart, accomplished people, are out there guessing on their pricing. All right. They'll be very well educated in their craft, or they're good at what they do. And then you ask them to price their products, and many of them will say, yep, I actually just kind of guessed it. Saw a competitor, made some changes there, made it up. And so I think a lot of founders and entrepreneurs are doing themselves a disservice by guessing on the one thing that impacts 100% of your revenue. And so by writing a book that is easy to read and puts a lot of real examples, real interviews, real checklists in play, it's just a way for me to break through that guesswork and reach a lot of people.
Excellent. And if someone wanted to reach you, what's the best way for them to connect with you, Marcos?
Yeah. So 2 ways to connect with me, most common, are going to be just reach me in LinkedIn, Marcos Rivera. You'll see me in there, and happy to accept a LinkedIn invitation. You can also just go to pricingio.com and you can submit a quick form. It goes to my team. Another way to get a hold of me as well. So those are the 2 best ways.
All right, brother. Well, we covered a lot of ground fast, whether it's in your personal story from birth to today, or whether it's lessons that, like, Dave, if I could talk to my 18-year-old self or my 10-year-old self or my 35-year-old self, this is something I think is really important for your listeners to grasp on and apply to their lives. Do you have any messages like that or parts of your story that we missed?
Something, if I were to think about what would I say to my 18-year-old self, which my 18-year-old self was still an idiot back then. I didn't know what I wanted, but at least I knew where the path I was going. I'll put it this way because of me going from New York, which is very fast paced, to San Diego, which is very laid back. And it's this constant balance between being a little pushy, but also being patient. All right. And if you think about those 2 things, right, in life or in anything, what I learned and what I will tell myself, and when you're 18, is like, look, man, you can decide when you want to be a little bit more pushy, to get something, to learn something, to go after something with conviction. And you could also learn when to be patient, meaning maybe you need to be pushy over a long period of time before the thing pops or before it happens. And so for me, it's understanding that it doesn't have to be a matter of being pushy or patient. You can be pushy and patient. And that's something that as an 18-year-old, I really didn't understand and get. And so I would say that to myself, is be able to pull up both of those.
Beautiful. I think that's excellent advice. Man, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. And in our original show notes, you talked about a special on your book. Is that still available to our listeners?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to send you a coupon code for 20% off for any of your listeners today to this podcast, and you can post it and you can have that ready to go for the audience.
Awesome. So just check out the show notes as usual, ladies and gentlemen. Check out Marcos's website. Hit him up on LinkedIn or through his website, contact us page, continue the conversation, maybe even partner up with him for some of your jobs and just grow together. So Marcos, it's been a true honor to become friends and get to know one another, to hear about what you got going on and to hear how you grew over the years and helping us do it too. Thank you, my friend.
It was a big pleasure being here today. Thanks for having me.
Oh yeah, anytime. And ladies and gentlemen, we love you. We know that we don't see you or get to talk face to face. So if you need anything, reach out to Marcos or myself or our team. You can connect to us through the website. You can connect to us through social media as well. But just like our slogan for the show says, don't just listen to the great knowledge and content and truth that Marcos brought you. Do it. Repeat the parts you need to each day. so you have a great life in this world, but most importantly, so you're prepared for eternity to come. So I'm David Pasqualone, and this was our friend Marcos Rivera. Marcos, thank you again, brother.
Big pleasure, man. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we love you. We'll see you in the next episode. Ciao.
The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life. The Remarkable People Podcast.